In these days of recurrent crises, when the alarm clock of history is being wound tighter with each passing hour, it's unusual for anyone to attain world renown solely through a philosophy of optimism, confidence, and faith. Yet this is exactly what a man named Norman Vincent Peale has accomplished. He's literally created a new epoch in daily living throughout the world, the era of positive thinking. His first book, The Power of Positive Thinking, written approximately 10 years ago, burst like a gigantic star shell, bringing light and confidence into the lives of millions of people. His confidence-building ideas, which he expressed in successive books, articles, lectures, and from the pulpit of the Marble Collegiate Church in New York City, brought him enduring fame and the gratitude of a restless world. Today, Norman Vincent Peale is consulted by hundreds of thousands of men and women from all walks of life. They come to him not to discuss the destinies of nations, but to talk about their personal problems. And those problems are the ordinary kind that arise in your family or mine. They concern our relationships with those around us, our attitudes and reactions to our personal and business life. Dr. Peale has learned the kind of help the ordinary man or woman needs, and out of his wealth of experience is able to help them. He has developed a series of remarkable techniques and formulas for meeting worry or trouble and overcoming it. His practical philosophy lies not so much in what he says, but in the awakening of an unlimited dynamic power within you. No other man in our day and time is better able to tell you how to develop your dynamic power than Norman Vincent Peale.
Now I want to talk to you about something that's very important, namely, how to improve yourself. Few people would deny that they need self-improvement, and I'm sure that most people want self-improvement. Now, the proposition that I want to make to you is this. We want self-improvement, we can have self-improvement, and we can have it right now. And how do you get it? Well, obviously, one must analyze himself, re-evaluate himself, and study more constructive work habits. But primarily and basically, the way to self-improvement is to learn to think more effectively. The most famous of the ancient thinkers of Rome, in a sense, was Marcus Aurelius, who said, "A man's life is what his thoughts make of it." That's a powerful statement. The wisest man who ever lived in the United States, some people say, was Ralph Waldo Emerson, and I certainly would not care to dispute it. Emerson said, "A man is what he thinks about all day long." Now, obviously, in the course of a day, we think about many things. But there is one basic or primary thought into which all other of our thoughts are drained and from which they take their color and their content. A famous New England psychologist said, and this is a wonderful statement, "There is a deep tendency in human nature to become precisely like that which you habitually imagine yourself to be." Now, imagination is not fantasy. Imagination is rather the art of the projected image. It is imaging, or the forming of a mental picture. You form on your conscious mind a definite and specific picture of what you want to be and of what you want your job to be. Then hold that picture persistently in the conscious mind until it sinks into the unconscious. And when it does, you have it because it has you. That is to say, you give all you've got to it, and therefore you attain it. Now, the greatest thing that's ever been said on this subject, as far as my limited knowledge goes, is by the late Professor William James, one-time professor of philosophy, psychology, and anatomy at Harvard University, one of the wisest men that America ever produced. And one of the wisest things he ever said was this, and this idea is of great importance. The greatest discovery of my generation is that human beings can alter their lives by altering their attitudes of mind. By that he means that if you're not satisfied with what you are or with what your job is, then change the way you think about it, and you'll change yourself, and you will change your job for the better. Now, I have discovered for all of us that there are certain things that cause us to fail and certain other things that cause us to succeed. Some years ago in New York, I established the American Foundation for Religion and Psychiatry. The purpose was to understand and improve personality by the application of scientific laws. We united the science of religion with the science of psychiatry. Psychiatry helps us to understand, and religion helps us to treat and improve. I had observed that we had applied the methods of science to everything else in the world, to things, but we had never applied scientific method very much to human beings. It is a recent discovery that there are two fundamental sciences in human improvement. One, naturally, is religion. The other is psychiatry. I felt that if we could weld these two sciences together, that we might thereby form an effective team that would help people to understand themselves and then to be improved. So I decided that I would find a psychiatrist who would have the same ideas as I had and who would help me. And I was very fortunate in being led to Dr. Smiley Blanton, one of the most famous psychiatrists of our time. He shared my ideals and my enthusiasm. He believed both in psychiatry and in religion. And we went to work some years ago to combine these two scientific therapies. It would work something like this. A man would come to me, for example, and complain that he wasn't feeling well, that he'd lost his energy and his vitality and his enthusiasm. He would say that he'd formerly been, for example, a very effective salesman. But now he'd lost his grip. He wasn't able to get along with people, nor was he able to get along in his own family circle. There was conflict and division. He couldn't sleep well. In other words, his personality wasn't functioning as effectively as he wished it to function. I would send him to Dr. Blanton, who would apply to him the procedures of psychiatry in order to discover the causes of his present failure. Then he would turn the man back to me with the information which he had secured, and I would apply to his personality the ancient therapies of prayer and of faith and of goodwill. We would show him how to rediscover and reorganize himself that he might become an improved human being. I'm glad to say that as a result of the combination of these two sciences, we've been able to help a great many people. But simply because I've emphasized psychiatry, I wouldn't have you think that I've gone all out for it. I still believe, of course, that religion is the main factor in improving human personality. But I do have a great regard for the psychiatrist, and of course, no psychiatrist will ever be hurt by anything that I say about him, for I esteem him, and I respect him, and I even have affection for him. In fact, I've enjoyed working with the psychiatrists. They are very interesting people, and they are unpredictable. It reminds me of something that happened here in New York not so long ago, when the American Association of Psychiatry held a convention over here at the Statler Hotel. For 4 days, the hotel was packed with them. The lobby was filled with psychiatrists. Now, as you undoubtedly know, across the street from the Statler is the Pennsylvania Railroad Station. around which from time immemorial there have been huge flocks of pigeons. As far as anybody was ever able to ascertain, these are well-organized, emotionally contained, well-integrated pigeons going about the daily life of being a pigeon. But apparently the emotional instability of the multitudes thronging in and out of that station transmitted itself to one of those pigeons, and to use a slang phrase, he got off the beam. By a process that has never been accounted for, this pigeon presently found himself in the lobby of the Hotel Statler, flying around among these psychiatrists. In fact, it is reliably reported that this pigeon flew around among these psychiatrists for 2 whole days before any psychiatrist would admit to another that he saw a pigeon flying around that room. Now, in this clinic, we have discovered that there are 3 points at which we either fail or succeed. And at these 3 points, we can greatly improve ourselves. And that is, learn to think differently in 3 different ways. First, learn to think calmly, quietly, serenely, imperturbably. I realize that that suggestion may seem to be inconsistent. Americans value very highly, namely drive, D-R-I-V-E. We always associate drive with success in America. But while drive is a fine thing, it must be controlled drive. Otherwise, a man will shake himself to pieces, get off his timing. He will overpress, as they say in athletics, and he will do not a good job, but a poor job. Therefore, we must learn one great truth, and that is that driving energy originates in quietness, in peacefulness, and in serenity. Some man some years ago made this statement: the streams that turn the machinery of the world take their rise in silent places. And Carlyle said that silence is the element in which great things fashion themselves. We used to have here in America a very wonderful poet by the name of Edwin Markham, and I had the pleasure of knowing him personally. He was a wise man. One day he was trying to describe power, and he used a cyclone to do it. And if you've ever seen a cyclone, you know that it represents concentrated power. Well, here's what Markham said. At the heart of the cyclone, tearing the sky, is a place of central calm. That is to say, the cyclone derives its power from a calm center. And I might say that the same is true of a man. If he's going to have driving energy to do an effective job, he must develop this quietness within himself. Well, you may say, how in the world, in the midst of a time like this that's so tense and excitable, can anybody develop this inner quietness? Well, I would only say this, that if you know you need inner quietness, and if you want it, you can have it. But in order to get it, you have to practice it. And I want to suggest a technique which I myself discovered some time ago. It's helped me immeasurably, and I think that it can help you. By nature, I'm a kind of a high-strung, tense, nervous individual. And really, I'm glad that I am, because it's a fact that the super jobs of this world are done by highly organized individuals. Of course, if you do not care about doing a super job, then you can be content with being a low organized individual. But I know that you want to do a super job. Of course, there is a danger, and we must recognize it, in being a highly organized individual, and that is that you can become highly disorganized. The people who have the nervous breakdowns are highly organized individuals who were not able to control themselves emotionally. But when you learn the art of inner quietness and develop controlled power, you can work hard, you can have prodigious energy over many, many years. Now there's a wonderful technique that will help you a lot in this. I know it will because it helped me very, very much. I stumbled on it quite by accident some years ago. I was sitting in my apartment in New York one night. I had the bad habit that a lot of people have. I would sit nursing all my anxieties and fears, and believe me, I had plenty of them. Then when it got along around 11 o'clock, I had a habit, and I suppose many of you have the same habit, of turning on the radio and letting all the fears and tensions in the world troop into the room. There I sat, surrounded by all these fears. And finally, there was nothing else to do but go to bed. And I would turn around all these fears, and I'd say, well, come on, everybody. Let's go to bed. Now, that's the worst thing in the world that you can do. And they would troop into the bedroom after me and perch all around the bed. Then I'd get into bed and try to sleep. But how in the world can anybody sleep when he is surrounded by tensions, anxieties, and fears? Well, one night it got so bad that I just couldn't sleep. My mouth was dry, and I was hot and tense and nervous, and I finally gave it up as a bad job. And I got up and I went into my living room. I paced the floor restlessly. I was nervous. I walked over and picked up book after book and examined them, but they weren't interesting. How could anything interest you at that time of night when you were tense and filled with fears? It so happened that there's an easy chair there in my living room where I like to read, and by the chair is an end table on which my wife puts books and pamphlets by which she hopes to influence me. Now, even though I am a professional influencer myself, frankly and confidentially, I just hate to be influenced by my wife. So I seldom read these pamphlets. But this particular night, I picked up one by chance. Was it by chance? I noticed that it was put out by a life insurance company. I'd never seen it before. I never saw it since. It passed like a ship in the night. But believe me, it touched my life for 1 or 2 minutes, and it's one of the greatest experiences I ever had because I learned something of very great value to me. I picked up this pamphlet, as I say, and thumbed it through quickly. Then I came to a page which literally struck me. There was a long finger pointing directly at me, and then on the page there was the little word U, Y-O-U, which quickly grew in size until, by that trick of the movies, it hurled itself at me from that page. And it said, "You are nervous. You are tense. You cannot sleep." And I said, how in the world did you know that? Anyway, now, said this author, you do not need to be this way. You don't need to be tense or nervous or high-strung. And here he said, I'm going to give you a 3-point formula, which, if you will follow it, you can overcome tension and nervousness. Well, I thought that's quite an offer. I'd never seen anything quite like it before. I was a little ashamed to try it, but here it was, 3 o'clock in the morning, nobody around, nothing else to do. And I figured to myself, it can't do me any harm, and it may do me a lot of good. So I decided to try it. Now, this is what he said. Sit in a chair and imagine that you weighed 500 pounds. Just yield yourself to the chair. Then he made the suggestion that it would be helpful to mentally conceive of yourself as a burlap bag filled with potatoes. Then, again mentally, take a pair of scissors, mental scissors, and cut the bag and let all of the potatoes roll out, and you are the burlap bag that remains. Can you conceive of anything more completely relaxed than an empty burlap bag? Then he said, push out your foot as far as you can push it and try to shove your toes off the end of your foot. There's a lot of tension in the foot. Then he continued, let your head roll back on the headrest of the chair, rolling from side to side to relax these tendons at the back side of the neck, for they contain a good deal of tension, too. Then another suggestion which I thought was very good was to imagine that little lead weights are attached to your eyelids. Then lift the eyelids up and let the little lead weights pull the eyes shut. And that's really very good, because I'm sure you have discovered yourself that there's a great deal of tension resident in the muscles of the face and in the corners around the eyes. And then he made another suggestion which is really wonderful. And I've done this so many times, always with good effect. And it's this. Raise your arm and let it fall limply upon your knee like a wet leaf on a log. Again, what could be more relaxed than a wet leaf on a log? Then you do the same thing with the other hand. And the final suggestion was, conceive of the great hand of God with healing in its touch, as resting one after another upon every member of your body, until finally his great hands rest upon your head, bringing peace, quietness, and serenity into the mind through the body. You see, for the body is sacred. It's the temple of the soul. Well, you know, after doing that, I was so relaxed that I went back to bed and I slept peacefully all night long. And you know, if I kept this up much longer, I'd put you to sleep, too. But my job isn't to put you to sleep. My job is to wake you up. My job is to release you, bring you out of yourself, get you untied, so that dynamic energy and power surges through you. This is a marvelous technique of relaxation. A second very important thing is that we must also shift from negative thinking to positive thinking. And I cannot emphasize too strongly how important this is. One of the most destructive things that you or I can do to ourselves is to think negatively. Psychologists tell us nowadays that thoughts are things. They have actual life and potency. Therefore, you must never, under any circumstances, underestimate the power of a thought. It contains either constructive or destructive force. Now, if you constantly pump out of your mind negative thoughts, what do? You activate, you might say, the atmosphere around you negatively. Light attracts light. Therefore, if we send out negative thoughts, in the very nature of the case, All in the world that you can get back is a negative result, and lots of people do just that. Now, on the contrary, if you fill the mind with positive thoughts and constantly send positive thoughts out into the atmosphere around you, you activate this atmosphere positively, and you draw positive results to yourself. So, it is very, very important to eliminate these negative thoughts and to bring into the mind positive thoughts. And how do you do that? It's done by a process of displacement. Nobody can, by willpower, say, now I will drive that thought out of my mind. That sounds all right. But in practice, if you do it, all you do is to drive it more deeply into your consciousness. So you must come around at it in a strategic manner and displace it. And that is done in several ways. One way is to associate with positive people, with people who think constructively, so that after a while you get in the habit about everything of speaking positively, about people, about propositions, and about things. Another good way to do is to read positive books. Read about people who have overcome all manner of difficulty and who have solved difficult problems. Read about people in business, in athletics, in politics, in history. Read good, positive books. And then another wonderful method, and really I think this is best of all, is to read the Bible. This is the most dynamic book ever written. And it is literally filled with passages about faith. I suggest to you, therefore, that you go into the Bible and you underscore every passage that has to do with faith. Such passages as, I can do all things through Christ who strengtheneth me. If ye have faith, nothing is impossible unto you. You commit these passages to memory. In so doing, you allow them to soak down into your consciousness until they condition your entire thought pattern. By doing this, you can often rise out of failures that have plagued you into real success. Now, the reason I know this is because I've had a little experience at it myself. And I'd like to tell you how I'm so sure of this. A few years ago, we established a magazine. We called it Guidepost. The idea was to fill it full of stories that had to do about people who had overcome difficulty. We decided we'd get the life story of people who are famous in America and people who are not famous, and fill this magazine chock full of the most dynamic stories you could possibly get. 24 pages, pocket-sized. We decided to make it interfaith, non-sectarian, non-profit. We decided also we'd try to get it in schools, colleges, industrial plants, business offices, everywhere that we could, in order to lift people out of negative into positive thinking. The sponsors of this magazine were some of the greatest positive thinkers in the country: Branch Rickey, Eddie Rickenbacker, J.C. Penney, Stanley Kresge, Lowell Thomas, people like that. We started the magazine. We priced it lower than we wanted to, but we wanted to widely disseminate it. We worked very hard at it. We had no money. I think I collected $700 to get the thing going. Finally, we had 40,000 subscribers, but that wasn't enough to pay the costs. And believe me, the sheriff was breathing down our necks. We had, for example, the nastiest letters from our suppliers. For example, there was the man who had sold us a typewriter on time. He wrote to us wanting to know why didn't we pay for the typewriter. Well, anybody should have known the reason. We didn't have any money. That was why. And so things got so bad that finally I had to call a meeting of the board of directors. And I want to tell you, my friend, that was the most drippingly negative, discouraged, hopeless meeting that you could possibly imagine. Now, we had invited a woman to this meeting. You may wonder why. Well, the answer is an easy one. On one previous occasion, she had contributed $2,500 cash money to Guidepost. And we thought that perhaps lightning might strike twice in the same place. But finally she spoke up and she said, I get the idea that you gentlemen would like me to give some more money. Well, she said, I might as well put you out of your misery. I'm not going to give you another cent. Well, this didn't put us out of our misery. In fact, it plunged us more deeply into our misery. But she said, I will give you something of far greater value than money. Well, this surprised us because we couldn't dimly imagine anything of any greater value than money. She said, I will give you a constructive and creative idea. And with this idea, you can get all the material resources that you need. Now, she said, for example, what's the matter with you at the present time? She said, you lack everything, L-A-C-K. You lack paper, you lack equipment, you lack facilities, you lack customers or subscribers, you lack even ideas. Now, she said, do you know how you got this way of lacking everything? You got into this condition, she said, because persistently, habitually, you have been thinking lack, and therefore, you have created a condition of lack. Well, this was rather hard for me to figure out. It was a new line of thinking, but upon reflection, I could see that she was logical because we sure did lack, and we knew that we had been thinking lack. Now, she said, what do? You must flush these lack thoughts out of your mind. Why, I said, how in the world can you flush lack thoughts out of your mind? She said, you can do anything with your mind that you want to do if you want to do it strongly enough. And that is the truth, too. Now, she said, the thing to do is to empty your minds now of lack thoughts. So, under her direction, we sat there for 15 minutes flushing out lack thoughts. Now, she said, your minds are empty. But you cannot keep the human mind empty for very long, although she did add parenthetically, you gentlemen can keep your minds empty about as well as anybody I ever knew. But we let that go by. Now, she said, you've got to fill your minds with prosperity thoughts. And that is done, she said, by the use of the image or imagination. So she said, I want you to picture the number of subscribers that you need. And she turned to me and she said, Norman, how many subscribers do you need to keep this magazine Guidepost going? I thought quickly and I said, 100,000. All right, she said, can you visualize or image 100,000 happy people reading Guidepost? I said, when do you want me to do that? She said, right now, see them. Well, I said, they look mighty dim to me. But something in her eye caught me, some dynamic quality in her spirit. And all of a sudden, I had an illumination. I saw those 100,000 subscribers. And I said to her, what do you know? I do see them. Well, you should have seen the look on her face. Ah, she said, now that we see them, we have them, which was a rather new thought to me also. But she said, now that we have them, let us get down on our knees and pray and thank the Lord that he has given us 100,000 subscribers. Well, now, I'll pray with anybody at the drop of a hat. And I got down on my knees with the lady, but privately, I thought it was pushing the Lord awfully hard. But you know, she was very smart. She came up with a passage out of the Bible, that most dynamic and creative of all books. And I shall never forget her as she said it aloud. She said, whatsoever things ye ask and pray for, believe that ye receive them, and ye shall have them. Now, I had read that 1,000 times, but I guess I'd never read it because now I saw what it meant. if you see something, and if you believe it, and if you've prayed about it, and if you have worked for it, then you have it, in essence, and ultimately, in fact. Now, what happened? When we got up from that prayer, there was the same old carpet, the same old table, the same old chairs, the same old pictures on the wall. But it wasn't the same old people. They had changed. They'd gotten a new idea. A dynamic thought had gotten into their minds. And from that minute until right this minute, this magazine Guidepost has never lacked for a thing. And today, instead of 100,000 subscribers, Guidepost has 900,000 subscribers. And it is taken by 1,100 firms for all or part of their employees. It's one of the most successful, inspirational, interfaith magazines in the United States today. Now, I tell you this story because it taught me and my associates a great truth, which is, if you think lack, you tend, in the very nature of the case, to create a condition of lack. But if you think prosperity, you tend to create prosperity because you release from yourself the forces and the thoughts and the actions that bring prosperity to pass. So, let me say again that if you learn to think not negatively, which destroys, but positively, which creates, you can become a successful and a very much improved human being. What I've been talking to you about is that you can change your personality for the better and improve yourself by changing your thinking. That sounds easy, but believe me, it's not easy. Because we have long established thoughts and habits, and they're hard to change. But they can be changed. You do not need to be a Superman to change. In my book, The Power of Positive Thinking, I tell of many cases of people who were defeated because their thought habits were bad. They altered their attitudes of mind, as William James said, and they became happy and successful people. So I want to reiterate, don't get the idea that this is easy. This will take you some months to accomplish. But I hope that you'll also not get the idea that it is impossible, for nothing in this world is impossible if you think it isn't impossible. Now, there's another thing I'd like to bring to your attention, and it's the third thing that I want to mention. And that is to alter your thoughts from gloominess to enthusiasm and joy. Enthusiasm is a great word and a great concept. You might even say that enthusiasm is infectious. When you have it, other people get it from you. And enthusiasm carries all before it. When a man is enthusiastic, he gives the job all he's got. And when you do that, you cannot help but improve your position because yourself has been improved. Have you ever studied the derivation of words? It's a very interesting study. Take this word enthusiasm, for example. It comes from two little words, en and theos, meaning from God, or in God, or better still, full of God. Now, that's a curious concept, I know, but it means this, that your Creator built enthusiasm into you at the time of your birth because he knew that one thing you must have in order to live a successful life in this world is enthusiasm. If you've maintained it, it's a priceless possession. If you've lost it, get it back again no matter how much effort it requires. Then the other word is joy. Joy is a synonym of harmony. When a person is in harmony, body, mind, and spirit, then he becomes a powerful unity. And when this harmony extends to one's associates and to the world and to God, then you have a personality that is working at full potential. Joy must be very important because doctors tell me today that in treating their patients, they try to get them joyful. One doctor told me that 50% of his patients were sick because over a long period of time, they had practiced habitual gloomy thoughts. He said, I've discovered that if you can get these people to lift their minds for 10 minutes every day into the area of pure joy, you can get them well. And then I find also that athletic coaches teach athletes that if they can be joyful in the game they're playing, that they get into harmony, they get into tune, their timing is good, they flow as well-organized personalities. Now, for example, I like to play golf. And I go to a golf pro, a Scotch man who's really a wonderful golfer. And he's a good thinker, too, and he gives me some wonderful ideas, and here's one of those ideas that he gave me. He was teaching me one day to drive, and he wasn't too enthusiastic about my driving. So he was telling me about a fellow named Joe, whom he was also instructing in driving. He said this fellow Joe was one of those tense, tied-up, unhappy people. He'd read all the books. He knew how you were supposed to execute every shot and how your stance should be. He would spend interminable minutes getting his feet right, and then he'd fool around with his fingers, trying to get them right on the club head. He'd hold his head down as he was instructed to do. He'd keep the arms stiff. He would pivot. He would roll on his feet. He would follow through. He did everything exactly right, except he didn't hit the ball. And so the coach said to him, the trouble with you is, Joe, you're not in harmony. And he described to him about the lubricant of joy. And he made a mistake in telling Joe about this. He says, Joe, what you need to do is to get lubricated. And Joe mistook this. He dropped the club and headed for the clubhouse. But the coach said, come on back. I don't mean that kind of lubrication. He said, I want you to pass joyful thoughts through your mind so that you flow as a harmonious human being. Well, Joe says, how in the world do you do that? Well, he said, do you know any songs? And Joe said, well, he didn't know any songs. The coach said, you must know at least one song. Joe said, well, I know that song, Let Me Call You Sweetheart. The coach said, that's okay, that's good enough. What I want you to do is to walk around the tee, singing at the top of your voice, let me call you sweetheart. And when I put up the finger, giving no thought to the technique because your muscles have memorized it anyway, you go into the stroke. Well, Joe was a little abashed by this, but he walked around the tee, singing, and finally got into the spirit of it, and he really sang it until the hills gave it back to him. Up went the finger, still singing. He went into the stroke and drove the ball 250 yards down the fairway. Now, I can well imagine that a good many of my hearers, next time they get on a golf course, will sing, let me call you sweetheart. And you know, that isn't a bad idea, because the great Thomas Carlyle said, give me a man who sings at his work. And so what we need to do is, by diligent effort and by discipline of our thoughts, get into our systems real joy and enthusiasm. Now, I'd like to make you an offer. How would you like for tomorrow to be the best day you ever lived? You say, that's a big order. Well, it sure is. We don't run around the country handing out little orders. We give big orders because, may I remind you, that I work for a very big firm. Now, tomorrow, to be the best day you ever lived, how do you do it? Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, Don't lie there moaning and groaning and glumping, pouring into the long-suffering ears of your patient wife all your aches, pains, and negativism. I realize that's what a wife's for, but you don't want to overwork her. Tomorrow morning when you wake up, lie there in bed and say, I am alive. And thank God you are alive. And then with a masterful gesture, throw back the covers and leap out of bed. And say to your startled wife, honey, I feel wonderful. Of course, she'll probably have a heart attack and die on the spot, but she'll die happy. Then go in to take your shower. And as you wash yourself on the outside with soap and water, wash yourself on the inside by singing a song.
My body lies over the ocean, oh, bring back my Bonnie to me.
And as you do so, you will flush out of your mind all these old, tired thoughts of yesterday that have defeated you so many times. Then, feeling alive to your fingertips, feeling like $1 million, you go down to breakfast. And you sit down to the breakfast your wife has prepared for you. And look at it with admiration and with respect. And then say to her, honey, this is the most magnificent breakfast I ever sat down to. That will inspire her so that the next day you'll not need to lie about it. Then go outside with your wife. Then take a good breath of the morning air. Fill your lungs with it. Then kiss your wife with enthusiasm. Pick her up and swing her around. I realize that for some of you that will be quite a... Transmit something to her even as you've had something transmitted to you. Then you say to her, honey, I am a businessman. I am a salesman. I am a trustee of American free institutions. I have a job, a good job, a worthwhile job. And I'm going out today to create. Now there's one more thing I would like you to do. And that is to pass through your minds one of the most dynamic thoughts known to man. And again, it is taken from that creative book out of which come power and strength. And I want you to say it aloud with lots of joy and enthusiasm. And this is it. This is the day that the Lord hath made. I will rejoice and be glad in it. And now I promise you that if you change your mental attitudes from tension to peacefulness, from negativism to positiveness, and from gloominess to joyous enthusiasm, that you will have the time of your life, all your life, and besides, you'll stay alive as long as you live.